This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jill. Thanks for setting this up. Welcome to the first inaugural webinar by OTECSA that we're calling Safety in Numbers. So let's give you a short intro as to why we set this up and a bit of background to our company before we get into things. So before we do, though, a bit of housekeeping. If you could stay on mute unless you've raised your hand in the Zoom function to let us know you want to talk. It just avoids any kind of microphone crossovers. If you've got questions as we're going through that you don't want to raise your hand and ask, if you put them in the chat function, what will happen? Jill will keep an eye on that and collate them at the end and say, right, here's some questions that come from the audience. But as I say, if you've got something you want to jump in with as we're going through it, through the kind of panel discussion, if you want to raise your hands and let us know, and we can assume there's a way to unmute you, Jill, as we go through. That would be good. As Jill said, we're recording this, so anybody that doesn't want to be heard on camera or seen, then cameras off, mute yourself. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide, Jill. So OTECSA, just a bit about ourselves. So we're a process safety consultancy, as you probably know, hopefully, based in Scotland with engineers around the country, up in Aberdeen, in Dundee, Grangemouth, and in Glasgow. But we do work across the UK as well as abroad. So recently we've done a bit of work in the States, Slovakia, and in Republic of Ireland. So we're kind of we go wherever there's a need. So we've called this series of webinars Safety in Numbers. As you can see, it's a bit of play on words, but it kind of rings true with a lot of the work that we do every day, trying to quantify risk. Understanding how to make processes safer for people working in high hazard industries. So this one of the webinars, we're trying to do these every quarter. As I say, this is the first one, so we'll see if it goes. If it's terrible, then we might just call it a day, but hopefully there's a good bit of discussion and engagement. This one is going to be focused on one of our key markets, which is the distilled spirits sector. And we've invited along a couple of my contacts who've known for several years to provide some insight into the topics we're starting with, as well as any questions you throw at us. So depending on the question, maybe depends on who'll answer it, or we might have to go away, think about it, and come back with an answer if it's particularly tricky. As I'm sure a lot of the people on the call are also based in Scotland. Obviously, you'll know the Scotch whisky industry is one of Scotland's biggest industries. There's some good stats out there, but just a few key ones to highlight the importance to the economy. Scotch whisky exports totaled about £6.2 billion last year, which was a 37% increase on the year before, and amazingly, it accounts for about 75% of Scottish food and drink exports, which I'm sure you'll agree is quite a significant contribution to the economy. We employ about 11,000 people directly in distilleries and at spirits companies, and then I think there's maybe fourfold that at associated companies and supply chain. So it's quite a big employer in the country, with about 143 distilleries, I think it is, as of this month, operating in Scotland. It's always been a big part of our business since we started 4.5 years ago. And I think we've worked with about 25 distilleries of all sorts of sizes, from a 30-litre craft gin distillery in the Borders to big continuous grain distillation plants across Scotland. So hopefully we've got some good experience to talk about, but that's why we've got some actual industry people here as well. So just a little bit of a note on the format. If you want to go to the next slide, Jill. Oh, there's a photo there of, sorry, some of the OTECSA team at Scott's Distillery, actually, in InchDairnie, just to show it's not just me. We've got a, as I say, a team across Scotland. So the format of this, as well as this kind of 5-10 minute introduction, plan is to have around a 30-minute panel discussion on some topics that we've kind of pre-selected, and then we'll open up to audience questions. So anything you might want to ask us about, or things that have been burning issues that you know about, you want to bring to the panel to talk about, that'd be good. In terms of introductions, we've got Jill, who's managing the questions, and obviously is an experienced webinar host in her own right, so she's helped out to organise this, so thanks for doing that, Jill, much appreciated. Myself, I'm Owen, probably heard enough from me, but I'm the managing director of OTECSA and a process safety consultant, who spend a lot of my time doing HAZOPs, LOPAs, disease risk assessments, that sort of thing. And then we've got, starting at the top there, we've got Karen Parkin, who currently works for Beam near Glasgow. I've known Karen for maybe, I don't know, at least 6 or 7 years, when she used to work at William Grant's. So Karen, do you want to give a wee intro to yourself and what you do?
Hi everybody. So as I mentioned, I'm currently working as a project engineer with Beam Suntory. Previous to this, I worked at William Grant & Sons, so I've got circa 9 years experience in the distilling industry, distilled spirits industry. So I joined William Grant & Sons after completing my Masters in Brewing and Distilling in Harriet Watts. I went through a graduate programme there and then worked as a project engineer there before moving on to Beam Suntory in September of last year.
Okay, thank you. Next up we have Scott, who's Scott Sneddon, who's distillery manager at InchDairnie, and I've just lost my screen. So I've known Scott for about 7 or 8 years as well, since he's been at InchDairnie, but I believe he has a fair bit of experience before that too, maybe. So you can maybe introduce yourself, Scott. And I'd also like to hear a bit about this collaboration I've heard about for LeBlanc, luxury brand, and your distillery, just if you want to give us a heads up what that's about.
Okay, thank you, and hello everybody. So I'm Scott Sneddon, I'm the distillery manager at InchDairnie Distillery. I've been at InchDairnie Distillery for the last 8 years since the distillery was being built. Prior to that, I spent about 10 years in Diageo, being an operations manager for Glenord and Glenkinchie Distillery. Prior to that, I worked in process support and process development in my previous roles. So I'm a chartered chemical engineer, really, with 20 years industry experience. With regards to the LeBlanc, InchDairnie Distillery is about to launch our first product. It's going to be a rye whiskey, and it's been launched in April this year. So the collaboration with LeBlanc is basically, we are looking for a quest for flavour. It's one of the founding principles of the distillery. And LeBlanc, for those of you that don't know about it, they do an opportunity to do big rides away with legendary cyclists, which is also supported of luxury dining and drinking in lovely areas around the world. I think some of them is like Rioja in Spain and also in South Africa and Johannesburg. So for us, it was an opportunity to mix what we're trying to do as a luxury brand, but also in the quest for flavour and pairing it with some nice food.
Okay, thank you. So I guess without further ado, let's get on to the first topic that we've kind of pre-selected. So we tried to select some things that are particularly topical at the moment in the industry, that I suppose between ourselves there's been lots of activity, and certainly on the process safety side we've seen them as a key area of interest. First one, we're going to talk about warehousing, ventilation, and the Angel's share. So as it says there's been a big focus recently on the safety of storage in whisky cask warehousing, and whether they have enough ventilation for the storage of flammables. As I say, it's highly topical, and there's a lot of opinion out there, and I think maybe lack of much science, which leads to more kind of mysteriousness about it. But it is, yeah, it's something that's a bit of focus from the HSE at the moment. Everyone's getting asked to review things and update their assessments. And obviously anybody building anything new is having to comply with something. So, you know, we're seeing varying tactics for that because there's not anything that's concrete out there. So I suppose the first question about that is if we're having to increase our ventilation and warehousing for flammability reasons or managing a flammability risk, do we think that's going to have an impact, Scott, on the angel share that we might be getting from the whisky and the maturation of the whisky itself?
I think there is a lot of conversation in the industry. Will it impact angel share? It probably will, because with increasing the ventilation, you're going to get a lot more air movement. So it means there's a lot more interaction between the air and oxygen and the actual casks. So just from basic science, you will, I think, have more loss, but maybe not a significant loss, but a loss nonetheless. With regards to the effect on the maturation of whisky, I think that's a bit more not understood, for a better term, because a lot of the traditional warehousing, a lot of companies are moving towards more modern ones. My level of understanding is that you will get some differences in the maturation and the flavour of the whisky depending on where it's stored. By how much, I think, is very dependent on the cask type and the whisky itself. But this is where it'd be good to get people's viewpoint from around the industry. I mean, the science would suggest you will get some changes. Is it going to be noticeable? That's really an unknown element. And I think that's where a lot of the big brands, the concern is if they do have to increase the ventilation, and it will have an impact on the angel share and thus the maturation of the spirit, is it going to have a detrimental impact on the flavour of their whisky?
Yeah. I suppose you don't know this till 5-10 years down the line, do you?
Yep. And by which point it could be, it could be too late to make any changes. Yeah. I think the real cause of concern about all of this is that it kind of came about with the changes to HSG 51, which the industry were aware of, but I don't think the impact of it was as maybe necessarily known. And then all of a sudden, the HSE were starting to reference HSG 51, where, I mean, our warehousing has been built for the last 8 years, and we used the Red Book to design it. And all of a sudden, we're looking to be changing the design concept by following HSG 51. So there's a lot of questions being asked by the HSE to sites, such as understanding the temperature profiles and understanding the ethanol levels within their own warehousing. So I think a lot of distilleries got caught that they didn't have this information, or the information was so old it was meaningless. So my understanding at the moment is that the Scottish Whisky Association are in consultation with a lot of sites who are in a working group that are working with the HSE, just to try and understand where each party is sitting, so that we can come up with some amicable solution. But like anything else, these things can take a bit of time. So my understanding is something will be achieved this year. And from that, there should be some clarification coming out from both HSE and the SWA. But what that looks like then, I don't know. I'm not part of that conversation. I just know it's been taking place.
Yeah. What about yourself, Karen? Have you heard any change in tactics of the way they're doing things in your business with building? Because you're obviously building warehouses at several places. Is it just? Yeah,
so we're doing quite a lot of warehouse building at the moment. It's not my area of expertise, but we are looking at complying with regulations in terms of increased ventilation and things like that. But I think it is a valid point in terms of the angel shade. And some of the other things we need to consider is that when we're building newer warehouses and looking at more modernised standards, how does that then feed back into traditional dunnage type warehouses that have been there for hundreds of years and tend to be concrete buildings with very little ventilation? So do we then get a different profile in terms of what's being stored there versus what's being stored in newer warehouses? I think the other thing when it comes to warehousing and ventilation is that you put a cask in there for 10 years, say 20 years. So to actually build up any data to know if it impacts the maturation flavour or to impact your losses, you need data for at least a decade before we're actually going to know what the impacts are in terms of flavour profile and losses.
So somebody needs to do some experimentation with some of the new make going into traditional warehousing, and some of them going into the new warehouses they built as like a sample and say, right, let's test it in 10 years.
Yeah.
Changes.
So I guess basically something like that. So you can compare a like for like if two casks were in at the same time in 10 years. Do they taste the same? Are their losses the same, or is there a difference? But that is where anything with warehousing is difficult, because you need the time to allow you to gather the data to make any kind of recommendations based on that.
Yeah.
Also, another thing you need to remember is that wood, the cask, is a natural product. So you do get natural variation within the same warehousing of the different cask types. So trying to do any assessment can be quite difficult because of the inherent variation in the product itself.
Yeah. I did read I did see an article, I have not read it, just having a coffee before this, that there was I think one of the big distillers is starting a study on wood maturation to try and bring a bit more science into that. But interesting that we put this stuff in casks for decades to get the maturation, but then you go to non-Scotch whiskey and the same rules don't apply, and you can pressure treat your whiskey for a few days and get 10 years of maturation. So I guess we're not all playing by the same rules, but at least in Scotland it's kind of everyone is, I suppose, in some way. Okay, what about what do we think there's going to be a real change in the risk of a big fire or explosion? I don't know how I feel about an explosion in a warehouse. Pretty incredible, I think. Big risk of a fire in a warehouse from increasing ventilation. Have we ever had a big incident in the UK in a whiskey maturation warehouse? I don't think. I think there was a big fire, wasn't there? Is it Chesapeake Street? Cheapside.
Yep, Cheapside.
Yeah, that's one. But that was, I think that was a completely different scenario.
Yeah, I mean the Cheapside one was to do with, it wasn't the members of the public or the actual warehousing team that got killed. It was actually the firefighters.
Yeah.
So as a result of that, it was the fire brigade that changed its policy that they wouldn't be risking their own personnel unless there was an immediate risk to life within the area. They wouldn't be putting anyone out to try and put it out. They would just sit and maintain it and make it as risk-free as you can. So that was a direct result of that. I think for looking at a lot of the buildings, I suppose, where they're located, if you all of a sudden start to put large elements of ventilation on the side of them, I mean, as we all know, there's warehouses that the general public can walk past, that people's houses go into. Are we going to see an increased risk by more ventilation losing out? It need to be assessed, I suppose, like anything else. You need to measure it to be able to manage it. I think the changes is the very fact it needs to be managed, because it is a change, and it might mean that as an industry we have to change our thinking of it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still a lot of conversations getting taken place at a higher level. So I'm afraid it's one of these we may have to wait and see. But I don't foresee there being a risk that we've had all these warehouses as they are designed for 50, 60 plus years, and the use of them has stayed the same. Are they more risky now that we've decided it's 1%? No, it's late. I mean, for me, the fundamental is understanding where the 1% came from in the first place, which, depending who you speak to, changes. So the actual legislation inherently has got an error in it. But I think it's got to be one of these things that's got to be ongoing, the conversation, and it's all about gathering the data, understanding your own warehousing operation, understanding what the losses are and measuring it, and then assessing it to see if there is a risk in your current design or not.
Yeah, I think that's very variable what people are doing. We've talked about this, haven't we, in the past, Scott, about some of the things that are good practice that you just think should be done, but that people kind of haven't even thought to implement. So I'm hoping that some data-driven evidence, or at least trends, will help to convince the HSE that there's maybe less risk than they're thinking. Yeah. Okay. Should we move on? got a question from Donald. Donald Ross, do we have any data on the ethanol vapor concentration in the air in an old style dunnage warehouse? What was that versus a new build warehouse, and what difference would new ventilation measures make to this? So from my perspective, there seems to be I think because the dunnage is obviously a lot less casks per warehouse.
Yep.
People seem to feel there's like inherently safer. There's also the kind of dirt flooring in them tends to mean that soak away is more likely rather than pooling of spirit. I'm sure probably somebody will have done some data logging on that. I've not heard of any. None of my clients have offered any when we've done assessments. Certainly for new build warehouses, and for big, palletized or racked ones, we've seen data on gas detection. I've seen it in warehouses that are not well ventilated, and you're not getting anywhere near 10% LEL. So it'd be interesting to see an equivalent new build with 1% openings, what you're getting regularly from that. I think hopefully there's some companies putting in some long-term monitoring. What about anybody else got any?
No, I think you're right. I think it's just going to take, I'm sure there is companies that has that level of information, and I think that's information has been fed into the working group, as I said, with HSC and SWA, that hopefully the outcome of that review, we'll get some of that information, maybe not the detail, but general information as you said before, I think if you've not started measuring it, then you probably should, because it's a useful exercise to understand your own operation. Yeah.
Okay. Right, next one, next topic, sustainability in distillation. We've seen a big increase in distilleries going for things like carbon neutrality, with some grand targets for the next few years, and then the use of things like alternative fuels. So where can we see, where from things we're working on, have we seen any big opportunities for energy efficiencies?
Well, I can talk a little bit about this, Owen. I mean, from an engineering point of view, I mean, you have seen it yourself, there's been a big push in a lot of retrofitting existing distilleries with TVR and MVR technology. So that's a means of trying to recover some of the energy that you lose from during the distilling process because of either the inefficiencies of using a worm or your condenser. So there's a lot of energy that naturally just gets transferred from one point to another point and not necessarily used. So TVR and MVR try and bring that back in. So that improves your efficiency. But I think there's been, over the years, a move away from using traditional heavy fuel oils and medium fuel oils to using either bio products from a burning point of view or for using natural gas. One of the things that we are looking at, and we make we don't hide it, is that we're looking at the concept of hydrogen on site. It is a new technology, so it has its complexity. Hydrogen is the smallest known element. So because of that, then the designing of the pipe work and all the infrastructure needs to be a lot more efficient and effective than you get from natural gas. But there is an opportunity, I think, within the Scotland anyway, that we're trying to move ahead in green hydrogen production. There's a lot of big projects happening. You just need to look at the Cromarty Firth. I think there's looking at the concept up there, as well as some other locations offshore in Aberdeen and such. So we're looking at, we're about to do an upgrade of our boiler, and we're going to be putting in a hydrogen ready boiler. That means we don't see it for the next 3, 4, 5 years, but we're already putting it into the design consideration, so that when the technology of creating the hydrogen efficiently and effectively, but also the means of transporting it becomes available, that we'll be ready to trial it and use it on site. It's the only way we can see ourselves getting closer to being carbon neutral is by looking at the gas, which from this point of view is hydrogen, to try and reduce that. Because ultimately the bulk of our carbon footprint on the site anyway is from the burning of natural gas and fossil fuels. Yeah.
But interestingly, there's a biogas plant over the road from you, isn't there?
Yeah, there's the problem with the biogas, and we currently use that to send our pot ale and our draft. So we get some of that biogas that's produced going back into the natural gas pipeline that we actually take some supply from. The
Yeah.
problem with that, or the barrier, is the tariffs. Is that we can't get the biogas directly from them to us because of the way that the tariff system has been put in place for them. So that's why we've had to look at an alternative way of reducing our carbon footprint.
Yeah. So they can't supply you have a separate digester with your own pipeline coming back.
Can't do it that way direct. Just the whole setup of their operation doesn't, and how they get their the payment system for it, the tariff system for better term, it doesn't allow us to do that, unfortunately. We've already evaluated it as a possibility, but now in this circumstances it's not viable.
Yeah. And so what are you, Karen? Have you seen the big projects you're doing? Have you seen has energy been a big driver? Or has there been any
it's definitely a big driver, and as you're aware, the SWA have committed to net zero by 2040. So across the industry, it's a big driver for everyone to look. Now, distilling in its nature is an energy-intensive process. We use high temperatures to distill the spirit, so that by nature. So it's looking at how we can capture that. And as Scott talks about, things like TVR and MVR. So if we apply these across distill, we can take that lower pressure steam at a lower temperature and reuse that, and in a way kind of get efficiencies of say 30 to 40% potentially back just by using TVR or MVR across distill. So there's definitely ways there on the distillation side. I think the other thing we need to consider in this is our water usage and how we reduce our water footprint. So things like consumptive water versus cooling water. How can we reduce our cooling water in ways like using heat pumps for say, or looking at closed loop systems to reduce what we're using in the system. Look at double pass heat exchangers, things like that. How can we reuse the hot water and such that we're getting off the still, say, to then put it into the process for say preheating for your mashing water, things like that. So it's about being kind of more clever in terms of what we've got, because we know we've got energy there. So it's how we use that rather than just losing it to the atmosphere.
Yeah, I think I've seen that with certainly maybe more the last question here of there's the big companies that have the engineers and I guess the budgets maybe to explore these things and work out how do we reuse this hot water or warm water from the cooling, the condensers for something else, trying to integrate it. And then I go to some distilleries who they just got the most basic operations and they're just literally throwing heat away, and you just think that surely that could be used for something. Surely there's an easy way to recover that heat, but it's just not. I guess until the cost of energy becomes prohibitive that they have to, you're not going to be forced to look in that direction, are you?
Yeah.
Sorry, Karen.
No, on you go, Scott.
I was just going to say, I mean, as you rightly put, the SWA have a target of 2030. So I think if everybody's all trying towards that target, as an industry, we tend to be supportive and looking for it. The information is readily available. You know, as an industry, we welcome people from other distilleries to come and see what we've got. It's not a case of that they'll replicate it, but if they replicate the concept, then they're in a better position, and so is Scotch industry as a whole.
Yeah.
And there might be either a lack of understanding in the people who don't want to change, but there also is an element that for some people they want to keep it as traditional as they can. So for them, they see that as a barrier that they don't want to change how they're doing it, because it'll either affect their flavour or it's part of who they are, their DNA, their character as a brand.
I think that is a big driver as well. Like every whiskey's got its own identity, so it's retaining your character rather than making everything the same. But there's still ways and means around it, and I think a lot of the time we lack the knowledge or the experience behind this at the moment. So being driven by these targets is a good way to make us as an industry think about them and think about things that we've got this heat here. How can we use it better? It doesn't apply to Scotch whisky, obviously, because of our regulations. But if you look at our Beaky distillery, they've actually looked at doing vodka and gin using peas, which is actually a carbon positive distilled drink. So obviously we need to use barley for whisky, but across the industry, things like gins and vodka, there's other avenues there that have been shown on pilot scales that can be better for the environment and the carbon footprint.
Yeah. P vodka.
vodka.
Just like, okay. So big projects. So you obviously talked about increasing your capacity and putting in a hydrogen-ready boiler. Karen, you're doing some big ones, potentially expansion projects and things, aren't you, from some of the distilleries, having to integrate new plant up to new standard or to current standards into distilleries with to distilleries built to previous standards, I suppose, with maybe space issues. Any big challenges you're seeing that you're having to overcome with that?
I think that is a constraint, and when we look at, say, expansion projects, or we look at some distilleries, not just within Beam, across the industry, a lot of the time you are constrained with space, and some of these technologies take up a large footprint, or you need a lot more space. So then it does become your kind of cost benefit analysis, because if your outlays are high, when do you get the payback? And if you're a smaller distillery, if that payback's too long, then you are putting yourself in some kind of financial jeopardy. So it is a difficult one. You almost need the capital there to be able to experiment with it. And I suppose as an industry, with the commitment to go into net zero, as Scott said, as an industry, we share a lot of the information. So as more becomes available and more of the bigger players look to invest in these technologies, that hopefully then helps some of the smaller distilleries as well, ways of looking at. Doesn't necessarily need to be huge savings or huge investments, but little things here and there can make a big difference to the overall output in terms of our energy usage and our water usage. So rather than focusing too much on one big thing is going to reduce us by 50%, where can we take 5% here and there, just make little savings across it that maybe don't require as much capital investment at this stage.
Yeah, good. One of the things I liked from your previous employer, Karen, was whenever you spoke to a project engineer, it was, well, what are you doing with that big space there? Oh, we always remember we're going to have to expand it in 5 years when the business likes it. So we always leave room for expansion in a project. Sometimes I think that when you're looking at these old distilleries expanding, you think, wish they thought of that 100 years ago when they built it. It'd be a lot easier now.
Absolutely. Space is always a constraint.
But you seem to have space in your still house, Scott, for these new stills that are going in. There seems to be, is that planned?
Yeah,
at some point?
Yeah, when we designed the distillery, it was always with the mindset that we'd space, if we needed to increase capacity, the capacity would be there. So all the infrastructure that we put in place was designed for, we are currently running at 2 million litres of alcohol, but the system can cope with 4 million litres of alcohol. So it's very much inherently built into the design. And as Karen said, it might, we're going to be doing it now. We've been running for just coming up to 8 years. So we always had that in the mindset that if things are how we think it's going to be, we will need this extra volume at probably year 10, year 15. So for us, it just came a little bit early, but the design elements were already done at the very beginning.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, should we move on to the next one, which is bringing legacy distilleries up to date, which we kind of touched on a little bit. So here we've got a little picture of an old school control panel that we've seen in one of our clients' distilleries. I mean, there's a lot of aging plant or maybe things that would be redundant now that we needed, not redundant, it was obsolete. If you needed to replace kit, you'd be struggling. So there'll be a lot of distilleries, I'd imagine, the next few years trying to upgrade to current standards. But one of the things we find is having a record of what they've actually changed since the original design. Having the documentation hasn't been historically great. So how do you integrate a new plant or changes to your plant into an existing one if you don't actually know how risks have changed from the original? Have you got any insights into that, Karen, from your projects?
I'd say that's $1 million question, it is hard, as you say, standards are changing all the time. So what was put in 30 years ago in terms of standards and compliance has changed to now. So when we look at management of change, I think we know going forward for any new installations or things like that, that we want to have better management of changes and put in these processes and procedures so that we've got all the documents, we've got all the drawings, that if there's any problems, we can have them on hand. But it's the, how does that fit into traditional, or where we're identifying gaps that we don't have drawings, or there's no panel drawings, we don't know what we've got there. So how do we retrospectively fix that as part of a new project and build it in, or as part of an expansion? Say, if we don't know what we've got there, part of our kind of pre-design steps has to become an investigation into what's currently there, and then hope that going forward we can build on this, that from now on we will always have that documentation there, that in the future we've kind of future-proofed it for ourselves. We are in a situation, I think, a lot of the time where distilleries hundreds of years old, that the documentation is not there, and a lot of the time it's been in someone's head, because that's been their job, and that's what they've lived and breathed for, say, 40, 50 years. Like, it's, as an industry, we've got a lot of people that have longevity in the industry, so a lot of the time that knowledge is ingrained in their brain, and it becomes, once they move on or retire, a lot of that knowledge is lost. So how do we retain that, and how do we make sure things are documented, that we don't lose that going forward?
Yeah. And does that mean, I mean, I was thinking as you're talking there, we don't have, it's in people's heads, we don't have the information, you're trying to make some changes. Is there like a bare minimum, it's on the screen there, is there a bare minimum we should have to ensure compliance? You know, does anybody know of a list of all the design information, compliance information you should have? Maybe that's a good, would be a good thing for somebody to define, would be, here's the stuff, if you're going to keep running your distillery, this is the things you need to gather, you need to know about on your site.
Yeah. I think you'll probably find, Owen, that every company does it slightly different, their management of change. They'll either use a different system or a different document. And from that, there might be some elements that is specific to one company, the level of detail or documentation that they expect another. So I think it might be just as a starting point, just having a conversation amongst the people in the industry of what do you use, or what level of detail. So if you're trying to start out yourself, anything is better than nothing.
Yeah.
But if you want to improve upon it, it is resource intensive to do it retrospectively. Whereas if you do it as you're going along, is always having that in your head, that making sure that all the documentation is there, and even the small changes that are done during the initial operation of a distillery, is recording that and making sure that's not lost. That's the hard bit. All the wee nuggets that you learn from the commissioning of it and then the running of it, the small subtle changes you do in the system that may seem small and trivial but have a huge significant impact on how the system operates. They're the ones that tend to be slipped through. You get the big ones, the P&IDs and the manuals and all of that, but sometimes it's the small nuggets is the ones that are the most important, but unfortunately fall through. And we're only human, it's human nature, which is part of that. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done on it, and I think it's the fact is that we're having a conversation of it. So MD doing any project works, brand new designs, is always try and make sure that all the important information is collated and recorded, no matter how trivial it is. Then later on the line, you never know, that might become really, really important.
Yeah, it's like if you're tweaking your control system, we'll just change that, and then you have some sort of power outage and lose that update. You're back to the base information. Suddenly your distillery doesn't work how you expected it to.
Yeah.
But we see it's not just having the system. We see people have the system or the plan, the documentation that they're meant to do, but it's the discipline for people to actually use it, and I suppose the enforcement of that. You've made a change, you've put a new heat exchanger in. Where's the management of change for it? Oh, it's just the same size. All right, okay, carry on. That's not a real example, but I know what you mean. There's a few steps that we're seeing. We're doing some process safety management work with a few different places where they've got systems, they've got it's all good, but then the question will be, are you implementing it? And if I've got a dispersed business with different sites, different cultures on different sites because they've been acquired at different times, are they doing it the same way? Are they, is one site just not bothering because the management's different?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of hoops to go through, but then you go to upgrade a distillery and you find out there's no no history, and it's a tricky one, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there'll always be gaps in it, but as long as we keep talking about it and discussing the importance of having a good system. And the thing is, you want the system to suit your needs. There's no point you trying to do a big, huge system that a big multinational will use if a simple page with bullet points meets your needs. It's about getting a system that fits your purpose. And
how did you do it at InchDairnie when you got up and running? Did you already have these things in place, or is it something you built?
No, we were mindful of it as we were running, so all the OEM manuals got collated. I had a simple spreadsheet, for a better term, of just defining what information we should be recording, and even down to the level of detail of communicating it to the staff, some of the ones that you can miss out. So we're by no means perfect, but we have a simple system in place that seems to work for us. For me, it's about making sure that we can, as we do the next phase of the upgrade, is that we make it better than what we did at the very start. So we're always learning, and the staff are different. They know more this time than they did the last time. So it's trying how we can best capture that. And that's always a challenge. As also with bringing new people in, are they going to have it at the same level of detail that you did when you were doing it? So it's trying to get that consistency approach. And we're not by any means perfect, but we do try. We do have it as part of the conversations before, during, and after each of the projects we do, to make sure that we're as best as we can be.
Yeah. And what about you, Karen, when you're doing a project for an existing distillery that maybe is quite its own thing, and there's a project team trying to do something, is there any, is it hard to get them to appreciate why you're doing all the paperwork and design side of things?
I think it's something we're actively working on as a business, trying to upgrade and understand the importance of management and change principles, especially when we're looking at expanding existing distilleries. And sometimes it does seem like a paperwork exercise. So it's building in the understanding across the sites of why this is required and why it's so important. And as well as that, it's then building it once we've got it. It doesn't just get forgotten about. It is a live document. It is a live process that we need to keep updating every time, so that the next time there's a big change, we know where we can pull the information from because we've got it all to hand. So I think it's building in the culture of understanding the importance of this, rather than thinking of it as being paperwork, thinking of it of how effective it helps us going forward in projects.
Yep. Good. Okay. Should we move on then? If we've got any questions from the audience, said here, we'll invite any questions from the audience for discussion by the panel. If there's a flood of questions, we maybe not have time, but I haven't seen a flood of questions coming in. So has anybody got anything they want to shout out and ask? I think that we need some discussion on. No?
It may be that the questions come after, Owen, so it might be worthwhile setting up a forum that people can, at a later date, if they've reviewed the recording, can then ask a question.
Well, I was actually going to ask a question. Obviously, because I've come from a different sector, and what I don't know yet or understand is how active the industry working groups are in the SWA, and do you have facilities either within that or somewhere else to share lessons learned on major incidents from other industries with the whisky sector, or for you to share that out with?
I suppose I can answer that by saying that the SWA have a plethora of working groups. So we've got an engineering one, we've got a coma one, and a health and safety one, to name but a few. And what they're trying to do is getting the right-minded people. And these forums are an open forum where if people have had incidents or issues on site, that they can raise them, and then it's discussed so that are freely to discuss about it and share learnings. And also, as you go within the industry, although people change companies, they tend to stay within the industry. But you always know there's someone, if you have a specific question, that you can pick up a phone. If they don't know who it will. So that's one of the importance I've found, certainly being part of the SWA.
And do they publish their, do they have like papers they put out, these working groups, or is it just meeting minutes for discussions they've had?
It tends just to be the meeting minutes with a summary of if there's been a specific incident that was discussed at the meeting, then that will be summarised on that. That's how it tends to be.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah,
we're obviously doing.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, we're doing, a number of process safety management projects, initially just around Scotland, and a huge part of that, of the management systems, is engagement with stakeholders, and how you set up maybe a lessons learned database and share all of that. And that was probably one of the drivers that's led us to these discussions today, because I think it could be a lot more visible outside of quite a close group. It is, to be fair.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
because we're not members of the SWA, but if we were members of the SWA, I think you can get kind of not distillery members, but industry members.
Yeah.
You have access to, would we get access to that kind of information, Scott, or is it just the people in the working group that get access?
It tends to be the people in the working group, but that's why we joined the SWA, to get access to all that information. But just because you're not a member, no, as we've already alluded to, as an industry, we're very supportive of everybody. So if people have a question, they can either go direct to the SWA or someone that they know within industry, and we're more than welcome to help anybody we can out, because it's for the better of everyone.
Okay, I've got another question on the chat. So I guess this is for either Scott or Karen. In terms of sustainability and reaching net zero targets, what do you think are the main barriers that need to be removed by the industry and or legislation?
I think as an industry we are committed to the 2030, but like everything else, the closer you get to it, you realise that you're not going to meet that target.
I think it's 2040, Scott, so don't
2040,
give 10 years away that you don't need to.
I think and this is why we try and use the forums like this, is that the bigger companies have access to the resources, both monetary and people, to go and evaluate what is the other options to achieve that. For us, no, we use technology for some of it. We're using hydrogen, but that's not going to eliminate it all. But by being within the other working groups, I ask questions to the other members so that people know, so that we're continually learning and trying to understand there might be some innovations coming through. So you never stop learning, as I suppose what I would try and do. So it's always about, and we're quite good as working as an industry towards a common goal, and supporting each other with information if you ask for it.
Mm-hmm. And again, it's another one of those things that you can, there's a lot of opportunity for cross-industry sharing. Right. Yeah. Another question, this is for you, Scott, you're popular. How would you manage a situation whereby a new process was more energy efficient, but had an effect on spirit quality? Would spirit quality take priority, or would sustainability benefit outweigh that?
Spirit quality, because without spirit quality, I don't have a product.
No, you don't have a business.
I don't have a product, I don't have a business. It's purely simple. Quality is first and foremost.
Yeah.
I think you've seen that, when certainly in the projects I've done with you in the past in your old company, Karen, quality seemed to be the ones that held all the weight. And some of the meetings we were in would be like, well, you can't do that because of quality. You can't do that because of quality. You're like, is there actually an impact on quality, or is it just the perceived impact?
And I think that's sometimes what we need to look at is what we perceive to be. I think sometimes we can jump to conclusions and perceive how that might impact quality without actually doing the research as such to prove whether it does have a negative impact on quality. I think sometimes it's the fear that it will, rather than actually evaluating if it does have. And I think sometimes that's where time can be a factor as well. Like with an industry, quite a lot of the time we want things done yesterday, so we lack that kind of hindsight to do a lot of these things up front. But I think, especially in terms of sustainability and using technologies like MVR, TVR, hydrogen, I think we've got the time to look at how they impact quality and make sure that there's not a negative impact before we implement them, but also check that before we rule them out.
Yeah.
But as Scott says, quality is key, because without a quality spirit, we don't have a product.
Yeah. So you worry so much about the quality of what's getting produced, and then you put it in a cask and you don't know what's going to come out like, because the casks can vary so much.
No, I mean, you got to remember, I mean, although the cask is a natural product, you get variations. You know, from the years of experience, that as you put into that cask of this spirit type, this is a flavour profile that you've expected, and it's what you've been seeing over that time. It's where, I mean, I think there's years ago you hear of distilleries who changed from a worm tub to a condenser, and that significantly was, from an energy point of view, it's more efficient, but it so drastically changed the character of the spirit that they felt it was too much in the wrong way, that would put consumers off. So they ended up going back to the old-fashioned worm tub, but looked at other ways that they could save energy not directly related to the worm tub. But they tried it, and it was only through doing it they realised that it was going the wrong way, that they weren't happy going.
Yeah. So we actually got a client through our design company that we're doing a distillery design for, and I'm pretty sure they're going for a carbon neutral distillery in the middle of nowhere on an island, and they're going for a worm tub. And maybe that's just not been thought about, that's maybe not the most efficient way to be cooling your spirit. But I think we want a really traditional distillery process. And then deal with the energy impact.
Yeah, but in the notion of the worm tub, I mean, there's technology now that the worm tub can be used to cool down the liquid, the vapor, but there's nothing to stop you then doing something with the worm tub itself to reclaim that energy back, so it's not going down the drain. So there's different engineering solutions to get the same or similar outcome.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Any other questions? Are we happy? No, I think I've got one final slide, Jill. Yeah, so thanks for everybody's input. Special thanks, obviously, to Karen and Scott for giving up your lunchtime to come and help be on the panel for this, and to Jill for organising it all. We're not quite sure exactly what the next safety numbers focus is going to be on. I've got some ideas, but look out for that coming out on probably on LinkedIn in the next month or so. If you've got any feedback or queries, please just get in touch. Owen at OTECSAconsulting.com, and if it's for Scott or Karen, I can forward on any queries you might have. But yeah, thanks again everybody for coming. Much appreciated. Hopefully start of many more of these. I don't think anybody's really doing this kind of webinar in the industry, so yeah, hopefully everybody found it useful. And anybody watching on playback, thanks for watching it on playback. Okay, thank you. Assume we lead now, Jill.
Yep. Yes.
Thanks, everybody.